You have seen the image, the one right here that Trump posted on social media yesterday, then deleted at some point late this morning today. You've also heard the outrage, and now you have an explanation. It's not me being Jesus, it's me being a doctor.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example, the 11,000, I understand your husband's going through treatment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's going through some very serious cancer treatment, so
yes, sir.
This goes a long way.
Yes, my fake news glasses were deceiving me. Let me take them off right now. I can see it more clearly. That is a doctor's coat, not a white robe. And those are his hands delivering antibiotic lotion, not golden beams of healing light. And those things above him, well, they're people he saved, not in the biblical sense, but in the made them better sense. Just like the DoorDash grandma who delivered him McDonald's today, she did that. He says he's helping her sick husband pay the bills through his no tax on tips policy. We're going to wait and see if he also told her he would revive health care negotiations in Congress or push for reinstating the ACA subsidy, the same one, by the way, that expired this year to arguably make budgetary room for his tax cut, which predominantly helps the rich. But I digress. He's a doctor, not Jesus. And if you see it differently, Catholics and Christians and the many MAGA supporters who begged him to delete the post or blame it on a staffer, then too bad. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Moments ago, California Congressman Eric Swalwell announced he will resign from Congress in the wake of serious allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. Allegations first published in the San Francisco Chronicle and by CNN that have now ended Swalwell's candidacy for California's open governor's seat. The San Francisco Chronicle spoke with a former member of Swalwell's congressional staff who detailed multiple encounters that she had with Swalwell that included unwanted sex. Her allegations include 2 detailed graphic accounts of encounters which resulted in the woman waking up without clothes on in Swalwell's hotel room. The San Francisco Chronicle corroborated her account of events with text and Snapchat messages the staffer exchanged with friends and Swalwell in the immediate aftermath of those encounters, along with medical records, which MS Now has reviewed. Those records detail pregnancy and STD testing that was administered a week after an encounter with Swalwell. In a statement ending his gubernatorial campaign, Eric Swalwell said this, quote, "To my family, staff, friends, and supporters, I am deeply sorry for mistakes in judgment I've made in my past. I will fight the serious false allegations that have been made, but that's my fight, not a campaign's." This afternoon, the House Ethics Committee announced it will be opening an investigation into Congressman Swalwell. And again, moments ago, in a social media post, Eric Swalwell announced that he will be resigning from Congress. I want to bring in co-founder of Punchbowl News and political contributor Jake Sherman and our congressional reporter Michael Snell. Michael, tell me how this came about, this resignation. This has snowballed since CNN's story and San Francisco Chronicle's reporting broke Friday afternoon.
Yeah, Katie, it snowballed very quickly, right? It was just hours after that San Francisco Chronicle and CNN article had published Friday afternoon that Eric Swalwell posted a video on social media calling these allegations flat, false, and vowing to fight against them. And then, as you just mentioned, on Sunday night, late last night, he put out another statement saying he was suspending his campaign for governor. And now, less than 24 hours later, Eric Swalwell saying he is resigning from Congress. I'll note he still is saying, quote, "I will fight the serious false allegations made against me." He adds, though, however, "I must take responsibility and ownership for the mistakes I did make." He also says that it's not right for his constituents to have to watch him fight these allegations, so he's going to do it outside of Congress. This was really the buildup as it was becoming more and more likely that Eric Swalwell was going to be expelled from Congress. We saw a growing number of Democrats and Republicans up here on Capitol Hill calling on him to resign and saying if he didn't resign, they would vote for his expulsion just minutes days before Eric Swalwell said he was resigning from Congress, there was a statement from Senator Ruben Gallego. He was the chair of Eric Swalwell's 2020 presidential campaign, a very, very close friend of Eric Swalwell. He said that he should be expelled from Congress and added, "I trusted someone who I believed was a friend, but it is now clear that he is not the person I thought I knew." Eric Swalwell lost a lot of allies up here on Capitol Hill, a lot of folks who were saying they were going to vote to expel him. He seems to have just jumped to the chase, announcing his resignation on his own.
Jake Sherman, from the alleged victim, speaking to the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, "I have no skin in the game of who becomes governor of California, but I feel people have a right to know whether the person who leads a state that is a safe haven for so many women actually treats women with dignity and will protect their rights," she said. Quote, "No one protected me from him, and so I have to protect the other young women like me who aspire to work in this field and he could prey upon." San Francisco Chronicle and CNN blowing the story open late Friday. And as we said, it snowballed from there.
It's amazing that within from Friday, and today is Monday, Nicole, Friday to Monday, and there was already, as Michael said, a groundswell of support to expel Swalwell from Congress. Remember, that's a big margin that you need to expel him from Congress. 2/3 majority, roughly 290 votes it would take to expel Swalwell from Congress. And just internally, what Swalwell is doing has two kind of immediate implications, both for himself and for the rest of the institution. Number one, he is sparing members of Congress from having to vote to expel him because that's a privileged resolution, meaning it can't be stopped. Once someone introduces it, it's going to get a vote one way or another, either an up and down vote or a vote on to table it or refer it to committee or otherwise set it aside. That's number one. Number two, this House ethics investigation, which was announced today, just hours ago, is over. If he's no longer a member of Congress, once he is no longer a member of Congress and formally submits that resignation, the House Ethics Committee no longer has jurisdiction over Swalwell. So that ends that. Now, there's been reports that the Manhattan District Attorney is looking into his behavior and some of the allegations. There's reports that DHS and is looking into whether he had hired an undocumented immigrant as a household employee. Those could still go on. Those are investigations outside of Congress. But once he resigns, this institution has no more say and no more purview over him, and most alarmingly, does not have the ability to look into allegations, number one, that he had relationships with people in his employ, people who were employed by him, and number two, the assault allegations, which are serious and which the Ethics Committee would have presumably been able to look into. So those are the two immediate kind of institutional impacts of his resignation.
But as you said, I mean, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is investigating the alleged sexual assault. CNN had, again, some extraordinary early reporting on the alleged abuse, and it's truly heinous, Jake Sherman.
It is. It's absolutely heinous. And these are, ended his career within 3 or 4 days, and that's how heinous it was. And I think from a political point of view up here, which probably precipitated his resignation, because remember, he is still denying all of these allegations. So in his mind, he's saying that, they have no merit. But I think that the nature of these allegations were just too much for this institution and thus him to handle.
What is the apology for bad judgment for, then?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not entirely sure what he's apologizing for. It's not entirely clear to me. He's clearly apologizing for something. I don't know what that is.
So imagine you are a small country. You're very proud, very important country, but you are little and you are not very rich. And you decide in your little country that it is time to put in streetlights. Right? You think we may not be a wealthy country, but gosh darn it, it is the 21st century, and in a bunch of our little towns and villages that want them, we're going to put in streetlights, or we're going to upgrade streetlights in places that need them to be fixed up. We're going to get funding, we'll get grants for streetlights, and we're going to do that all over the place in our country. Now, if you are a town that wants in on this project, if you want some streetlights for your town, what your government tells you is, okay, here's how you're going to do it. Your town, your village, if you want streetlights, what you have to do is you have to hire this particular company. And it's a consulting company, and that consulting company will assess your town's needs. And after they do an assessment in your town, they will basically attest to what kind of streetlights you need, and then those are the kind of streetlights you will get. That's the process. That's how we're getting streetlights in our country. And it turns out that as all the little towns all over the country start going through this process to get their streetlights, they all, as they are told to do, they all hire this one company, this one consulting firm to help them get their streetlights. And a couple of things pretty quickly emerge. First of all, that company, the company they're all told they have to use in order to get their streetlights, that company turns out to be owned by a guy who's in business with the Prime Minister's son-in-law. And the business he's in with the Prime Minister's son-in-law, the company they own together, turns out to be a company that makes streetlights. Huh! What a coincidence, right? So every little town all over your country has to hire this one company. And every single time, the guy who runs that company comes in, looks around and says, yes, I've looked at this very carefully. I've assessed your unique needs here in your town. And it turns out the only streetlights you should get, the only streetlights you can get, the streetlights, in fact, that you're going to get are the streetlights that are only sold by the company that is owned by the Prime Minister's son-in-law and also me. That is your only choice. You want streetlights, that's how you get them. And even though these guys had no streetlight expertise, even though their company was brand new, essentially set up just for this purpose, even though basically nobody else had ever bought streetlights from them before without being forced to do so, now, all of a sudden, boy, do they have a lot of business. Yeah, the Prime Minister's son-in-law turns out to be basically the sole supplier of streetlights to towns and villages all over the country. And as such, he is paid very handsomely for that in public funds. The country where this happened happens to be in Europe. And it turns out the funding for the streetlights came from the European Union, from the EU. When investigative reporters figured out that this scheme was happening with the streetlights, and when the EU investigated themselves, they realized this well-intentioned project, sort of small-scale project to put streetlights in this poor country, had instead become basically just a project to make the Prime Minister's son-in-law a millionaire. The company, of course, says they did nothing wrong, but the EU pulled their funding for that project. How did the Prime Minister react to that? He said, well, okay, I guess we can't do this with EU funds anymore. We'll just pay for it ourselves, our country, out of our meager budget as one of the poorest countries in Europe. We'll pay for it. Which means the Prime Minister decided that he would just pay his son-in-law directly from government funds. And that is how Viktor Orban's son-in-law made his first millions. Since then, over the course of Viktor Orban's 16 years in power, Orban's son-in-law has become one of the wealthiest men in the whole country, worth hundreds of millions of dollars at least. One of the sectors he's in is streetlights. Another sector is that he owns lots of luxury hotels. I mentioned the EU, the European Union. The EU has a presidency that rotates from country to country every 6 months. When the EU presidency automatically rotated to Hungary, to Viktor Orban a couple years ago, what that meant in very practical terms is that there would be lots of official delegations from other European countries coming to Hungary all the time, coming to Budapest to do EU business, because Viktor Orban was the president of the EU for that 6-month period. What some of those other countries would soon find was that no matter what hotels they booked themselves into in Budapest for one of these official visits, the Orban government would somehow find a way to unbook them from the hotels they wanted to stay at, and instead they would find themselves magically rebooked into one of the hotels owned by Viktor Orban's son-in-law. They would make reservations at different hotels, and the Orban government would unbook them and put them in his son-in-law's hotels instead. That was uncovered by investigative reporting from Direct 36 and V-Square in Hungary. Viktor Orban's son-in-law has had a good time of it while his father-in-law has been in effectively dictatorial control of the country of Hungary. The FT reported last year that he nearly doubled his net worth to almost 500 million euros just in the previous year alone. Nice. But ahead of the elections yesterday in Hungary, which saw that young man's father-in-law turfed out of power after 16 years and potentially now facing prosecution for corruption and theft of public assets. Ahead of yesterday's election in Hungary, Orban's son-in-law left the country. He left Hungary and reportedly relocated to the friendlier environs of the United States. And forgive me, I am terrible with Hungarian names, so I don't know exactly how to pronounce the son-in-law's name. You can see it there. It's spelled Istvan Tiborcz. I don't know exactly how you say that name, but I think that it's pronounced Jared. I think that's not true, but that is one way to pronounce it. Istvan, Jared. Trumpism in the United States is not just a purely personal thing. Trumpism in the United States is not just a big political manifestation of the quirky authoritarian personality of Donald Trump the man. I mean, it may be that for Trump himself, but in terms of power, in terms of governance, in terms of why all these other people on the American far right like Trump in power and what they want to do with Trump in power, it's not just based on Trump's personality. It's actually based on a model. More than anything else, it is based on the model of Viktor Orban in Hungary. Remember Project 2025? The Heritage Foundation created Project 2025 to plan out what exactly the Trump administration would do once they got into power, and the Trump administration has followed that blueprint very tightly. The head of the Heritage Foundation says outright that in looking for a model for how conservatives should approach power and government, he said Viktor Orban is not a model of how to do that. He says Viktor Orban is the model for how to do that. Strongman authoritarians like Orban and like Trump, their ongoing rule is not inevitable. It is not a fate that our countries cannot escape from. These guys are not permanently in power. They are not in power for life. As the disciplined, nonviolent, big tent, sustainable, growing resistance to Orban started to coalesce, as Orban started to look like he was going to lose, his supposedly unbreakable base of support just collapsed. The guy who just beat him is a former member of his own party. Nobody actually likes a corrupt despot. They all just support him because they think he's going to be in power forever. So you need to stay on his right side in order to get anything for yourself. When it becomes clear that that's not true, that the despot is not going to be there forever, it always, everywhere, always falls apart. But while the President of the United States is in the state of mind that he is in, while he is posting pictures of himself online that portray himself as Jesus Christ, while at the same time he is attacking the Pope, while his actions have slowed the economy to such a crawl that in other countries, that same level of economic stagnation is cited as a reason that country just rose up and overthrew its authoritarian leadership. As Donald Trump is taking these increasingly wild and increasingly inexplicable military swings in the Middle East that really do make no sense, that appear to have no point, and that have left us with almost literally no allies in the entire world. As the president appears, bizarrely, to be trying, I guess, potentially to offload his vice president, because maybe that'll help. Amid all of this insanity, it may be a good time to remember that this kind of desperation from the White House and from the president is palpably driven by fear, by the expectation that voters, that the public, that the nation at large has turned against him and is doing so more and more every day, that the country is going to turf him and his party out on their ear, and quickly. I mean, the whole idea of these guys, Orban and Trump and all of them, the whole idea of them is to create a false sense of permanence, that they can never be ousted, that they will never leave, that resistance is futile, that you better line up with them because you'll never beat them. They're going to be here forever. Well, how's that going? Streetlights or no? The streets of Budapest, the streets of Hungary last night were lit up to the stratosphere with pure joy, lit up like a beacon with the proof that the people can fix problems like this, like Viktor Orban and like Donald Trump, and that no would-be strongman can stop it anywhere, no matter what.
Joining me now is Bloomberg White House correspondent Jeff Mason, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and director of the Latino Working Class Project, Mike Madrid. And here on set with me, the author of Pope Leo, Inside the Conclave and the Dawn of a New Papacy, Christopher White, associate director at Georgetown University's Initiative for Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. I don't really even know where to start, but can we put the picture up again? Because you lived in Rome for several years.
Yeah, 4 years.
You've been in hundreds of churches and museums because that's what you do, but you don't have to be in Rome to do that. Is this classic depiction of Christ?
I think anyone that's spent any time in any sort of religious place knows this is a classic image. You don't have to be an art historian to know that. I think it's an insult to the American people to assume otherwise. Millions of Americans are religious, Catholic and non-Catholics alike, and they can tell you exactly what this image looks like.
All right, then there's another fact check. Trump wrote this of Leo, quote, "He was only put there," meaning in the pontiff's seat, "by the church because he was an American, and they thought that would be the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump." You literally wrote the book on the conclave. You and I were both there when the cardinals were arriving. Was that the topic of conversation?
Well, I think the Cardinals are very clear to say, look, this conclave was not a continuation of the American political election cycle. But I do think the fact that Leo presents himself as a profile of someone who believes in the common good, who is serene and interested in just sort of bringing the world together, offers a pretty stark contrast to the president. And that was pretty attractive to a lot of the Cardinals going into vote. And an American who believes those things and who is committed to multilateralism, sure, that's something they want to see more of, absolutely.
But not someone who would get them in good with Donald Trump.
No, yeah, Pope Leo was not elected to be in the good graces of President Trump, that's for sure.
Jeff, just in the last hour, the president was asked if he would apologize to Pope Leo. Here's his response.
Will you apologize?
No, I don't, because Pope Leo said things that are wrong. He was very much against what I'm doing with regard to Iran, and you cannot have a nuclear Iran. Pope Leo would not be happy with the end result. You have hundreds of millions of people dead, and it's not going to happen. So I can't. I think he's very weak on crime and other things. So I'm not. I mean, he went public. I'm just responding to Pope Leo.
He's responding to things that he never said, Jeff. Let's just be clear on that. He's not looking for a nuclear Iran, nor does he like crime in the streets of our cities. But is there, Jeff, anyone in the White House who thinks that attacking not just a very popular pope, but the first American pope is a good idea?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to say if there's anyone in the White House who thinks that's a good idea, but I think that probably applies to a lot of some of the president's social media presence. I think the fact-checking that you've done so far is spot on. Certainly the president's words there in his social media post and in the gaggle with reporters that he just did is classic Donald Trump, in that he lashes out at people who oppose him or oppose his policies. And that applies to anyone from, a lower-level political analyst to the Pope of the Catholic Church. It's also a contrast with how he welcomed the election of Pope Leo when he was elevated to this position. President Trump was thrilled and connected the fact that he was an American, as he did in that social media post that you referenced today, to basically being a compliment to him. Then he changes his tune when someone like the Pope opposes him or is critical of his policies. So it's in line with how he treats people, friend or foe, when they are on different sides of things, and they are very definitely on different sides of whether war is a good thing.
Mike, do you have a sense of how all of this is landing with the Latino community, whether it's criticizing the Pope or posting himself in an iconic setting of Jesus? We should say many in the Latino community are Catholic. Many of them helped President Trump take back the White House in 2024. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, the answer is it's not landing well. You've got a president who's slipping in the polls broadly with all sorts of constituencies. The Catholic vote itself broke decidedly for Donald Trump in 2024. And the Catholic vote has always been sort of a bellwether of where the country seems to be going. It's one of those few swinging votes that remains in American politics. But the Latino vote itself is actually a bigger swing vote, and it's comprised about half of which are Catholics. And Catholicism politically is very different than white evangelical Protestantism. It's not motivated nearly the same way that culturally conservative, socially conservative issues are. It tends to be much more social justice messaging that comes from, being deeply imbued with Catholic traditional teachings. So the reverence for the poor, the least among us, the immigrant, the refugee, the stranger, all of that language that you're hearing from Pope Francis and now from Pope Leo is really a uniting force for Catholics, especially when the Latino community is under siege and very much views itself being hunted and terrorized by this administration. So again, Pope Leo, by the way, is one of the few very, very popular public figures in America today. So this is going to be, I think, very damaging for the president, politically. But beyond that, I think this could be just a generational moment where people kind of waking up and realizing this man is not at all who we thought he was.
It's interesting, Chris. We were looking at those live pictures from Algeria. The Pope is on the first of, I think, an 11-day trip to Africa, where the church has been growing, unlike here in the United States, although the number of converts has been going up, particularly among a lot of young people who seem to be searching, just as Mike pointed out, in an uncertain world, looking for maybe a little bit of stability. But let's talk about Bishop Robert Barron, member of the president's Religious Liberty Commission. He slammed Trump for his statements, calling them entirely inappropriate and disrespectful. We also heard on 60 Minutes, this was before Trump made these comments in Truth Social, a group of American cardinals talking about the Pope's criticism of the war. Here it is.
He's the pastor of the world. He's not a pundit. So the distinction is he's not going to pronounce on everything, but he's going to pronounce on what's important.
How are things landing here in churches? I've been listening very closely at Mass to hear whether or not it would come from at least the pulpit. I don't think New York City is necessarily a harbinger of, what else might be happening. But has he changed the way some priests and some religious and maybe even folks in other faiths may approach this?
As Mike said earlier in the segment, Pope Leo enjoys remarkable approval ratings. He's one of the most trusted leaders on the world stage right now. And what's remarkable to me is that we've heard President Trump time and time again clamor for the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And he likes to boast about all these wars that he's allegedly ended. He would have no greater partner on the world stage than Pope Leo, who has continually made peace his top priority, if he really wanted partnership. But I think we've seen over the last 24 hours that's not what's motivating President Trump.
Mike, the reaction to the AI depiction of Trump as Christ has been brutal. A lot of Trump-friendly conservative influences are nothing short of furious. They've called it outrageous. They've called it sacrilegious. They called for Trump to take it down, which he did. In 2024, you pointed this out, 55% of the Catholic vote went for Donald Trump. I just wonder, as he continues down this, what seems to be a path of a fight with Pope Leo, is it your sense that there is anyone in the community who might have any influence? I'm not sure what influenced him to take down that post, but do you take it as a direct response?
Well, there's no question. I mean, look, this was an appropriate capitulation. I think when he started to get pushback from white evangelicals within the White House, who were basically, look, there's a growing anti-Catholic sentiment that is tangible from this White House, and it's been emanating for the entirety of the second term, and now it's seeping out into direct attacks on the Pope. This sort of blasphemous, by anybody's estimation, a blasphemous image that even evangelicals were recoiling from. So look, this is a president who's decided to take on an extraordinarily popular, well-revered, well-liked figure. Leo himself, by the way, leaned into violence and the anti-Fujimori sentiment in Peru, left Chicago to be there amongst the faithful during a time of great violence. He's not afraid of these issues. He has a deep commitment, as he should, as the Pope, to the gospel and preaching to those that need to hear this word. I think that's emanating beyond the Catholic faithful. It's moving up to Christianity and to people of all faiths who are saying, wait a second, why are we engaged in this war? Why are we doing this? And for the moment, I think the public globally is responding to Leo's message, which is coming almost daily now. And that, I think, is what the president has been recoiling from.
Whether it's this or the war, Jeff Mason, or immigration, as Mike rightly points out, sometimes it seems like that whole thing was like last year, but of course it was only a few months. Are you hearing anything within the White House that there is some sort of trickle-down concern about what this might mean for the midterms? Or is there continuing bluster that somehow all of this is going to work out, gas prices are going to come down, and people are going to come back around?
Oh, I think there's definitely concern about the midterms for many of the reasons that you just cited, Chris. Certainly the concern about gasoline prices goes all the way to the top, and that's something that may last all the way through the midterms, which is something that the president referenced over the weekend, too. But this type of thing doesn't help. That said, I would add a fact check of my own to this segment, which is it takes a lot for the religious right to part with Donald Trump. And what would be interesting to me to see is if someone like Franklin Graham says that post was inappropriate. Anyone who spent any time in Sunday school growing up, as I certainly did, knows that that is a religious-looking picture. But that doesn't mean that they are parting with him unless it goes up to really the top supporters of the evangelical right community. Seeing some comments on Twitter does not a break make.
David, this blockade has now been in effect for an hour, and the White House confirming it's a go. It's happening. Bring us the very latest.
So what the White House is saying is that there was some change in the announcement yesterday. First, the president said all ships of any nation going anywhere in the Gulf are going to be blocked. It sounds like someone went to him and said the focus should be Iran. So the way this will work is it's only ships going to Iran and coming out of Tehran that will be stopped by the U.S. Navy. The problem with this strategy is that I just spoke to a diplomat in the Gulf also. Other ships are now afraid to move as well. Ships from, Kuwait or the UAE aren't going to make this trip because there's rumors that there are mines in those waters. Like so far, this hasn't caused a great reopening for non-Iranian ships. So, and then the second problem with this is that Iran has diversified its economy. It's not so dependent on oil sales and things coming in and out by ship. There's land trade routes. So my sense is the Iranian regime will not back down. This blockade will start and they won't back down.
I think a lot of people are thinking, wasn't there already a blockade? Isn't that what the president was trying to remove? And so now we're just adding to that? Is that what's happening here?
It was a small number of ships, 4, maybe 8 a day going through, many of them carrying Iranian crude. But again, Iran has been bombed, intensively for a month. So I just don't see this strategy leading to, some quick concessions from Iran.
Laura, what is the White House expecting, given it appears the United States is going alone at this blockade with allies like the UK and Spain saying they will not assist? President Trump is saying, quote, we're fully locked and loaded and our military will finish up the little that is left of Iran. So where do things stand in the White House this morning?
Well, they're moving forward with this blockade. But that being said, I asked the White House which countries, if they could give us a list of which countries are potentially going to be helping the U.S. with this blockade, and they didn't respond with any answer on that. And so ultimately, again, the president appears to be going alone in this area. I know there is a question of whether or not Gulf states ultimately help the U.S., but right now, as you outlined, Anna, those key European countries are saying that they're not going to help. And the president just last night, as he was returning to the White House, was again attacking those allies, attacking NATO. Take a listen.
I'm very disappointed in NATO. They weren't there for us. We pay trillions of dollars for NATO, and they weren't there for us.
And many of those European countries, their populations don't necessarily support this war, especially in those two countries you mentioned, the UK and in Spain. There's polling in both of those countries that show that the public does not want their leaders to help the U.S. or to get involved in any actions against Iran, Anna.
General, how difficult will maintaining this blockade be for the U.S. military? How does it even work?
Well, the Navy certainly has the capacity, and they've already put a couple of destroyers through the Strait of Hormuz, in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. So they are establishing channels through which there can be safe passage. So that's number one. And number two, the Navy knows how to do that, certainly in concert with the Marines once they arrive on station. It is part of their job jar. I mean, that's what they do. Their mine countermeasure capabilities are very, very extensive, and that's subsurface to above the surface capabilities. So if the real issue is to increase the flow as it was in advance of Epic Fury, it's going to take some time. But as David has indicated, Iran has also figured out over the course of years, that oil is very fungible. Russia has figured out the fungibility of oil. It can go in different routes. And so is this necessarily, if at the strategic level, the desire is to create an immense amount of pressure on Tehran? I think it does. But can they work their way around it? Are there ways that they can mitigate this pressure? And the answer is yes, they've figured that out. And I think what the United States obviously is trying to do is say, look, we're going to take the momentum, we're going to take the initiative, we'll ensure what comes through and what doesn't come through. And again, there are tons of details associated with what that looks like, but it's manageable. Other nations should get involved, could get involved, but that's not a defining factor. That's not a limiting factor in terms of how to get it done.
Iranian officials have already said that they have large untouched levers to counter any naval blockade. Stephen, how do you see them responding to this?
Well, let's start by saying that the Iranians are often full of a lot of bluster. But I think what's been clear over the course of the last 5.5 to 6 weeks is that as the president escalates and tries to ratchet up the pressure on the Iranians have countered with drone strikes, missile strikes, and cruise missile strikes on America's partners around the region. So that is likely what the Iranian response will be to the American attempt to blockade Iranian ports and ships making their way for Iran. That is shouldn't be a surprise to anybody at this point, and there are already concerns in Israel that the Iranians are planning a very significant offensive in response to this blockade.
The president continues to issue more and more threats. That seems to be his go-to tactic, Stephen, with just this morning him saying, any of these fast attack ships would be eliminated. And the fast attack ships, he said, are these much smaller ships, not the big Iranian Navy ships. But as we all recall, ahead of the ceasefire, the president made a very controversial statement threatening to end an entire civilization. And he is defending that statement and this strategy. Take a listen.
That statement got them to the bargaining table, and they haven't left. They haven't left the bargaining table. I predict they come back and they give us everything we want.
Stephen, do you agree with any of that?
It seems to me this is part of a pattern where the president, again, escalates and the Iranians respond, and then the president either has to escalate or look for another way out. I'm not entirely sure that the Iranians begged for the negotiation. After all, they believe they are winning this conflict. And in fact, they are in a better position strategically now having control over the Strait of Hormuz than they were on February 27th. There are indications that there are continuing to be conversations, indirect conversations, contact between the Pakistanis and the Iranians, contact between the Saudis and the Iranians. So there may yet still be something to salvage out of the Islamabad meeting. But of course, all the issues on the table will take a very, very long time to negotiate. So I think that we're going to be in this pattern of threats to escalation, Iranian responses, the president threatening once again for quite some time.
Meantime, David, you have some new reporting on China coming to Iran's defense. What are you learning?
And this was initially a CNN report. It's just confirming what they said. I want to be fair to them. That China has been preparing, they haven't done this yet, to send shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles to Iran. And those weapons could be used to shoot down low-flying American aircraft. As viewers remember, 2 U.S. aircraft were shot down unexpectedly, about 10 days ago. So if that shipment went through, that would be a significant escalation. The concern is that would China start backing Iran? Would Russia start backing Iran? And I just had a contact, an expert on Iran, who's speaking with folks in Tehran. And what's being said there or heard there is that the government there is considering responding to this blockade with military actions of its own, that the Iranian government is thinking of doing that. A blockade is an act of war. So by setting up this blockade, that is what President Trump has done. And it's just, I agree with Stephen and everyone this morning. It's the president escalating, and Iran seems to respond with its own escalation. This has happened over and over for the last 5 weeks. So I don't know how this is going to play out.
But China potentially inserting itself.
Yes.
I mean, what's in it for China? Is it all about Iran's oil that they need, or is there something more here going on?
There's more. I mean, I think that stakes for China in this conflict are enormous. Bluntly speaking, I think there's still a good chance for a deal before the ceasefire expires next Tuesday. I don't think the U.S. will achieve all of its goals. If the U.S. fails to secure Iran's uranium, fails to, prevent Iran from gaining control of the Strait of Hormuz, that weakens the United States on the world stage, and China gains from that. An erratic U.S. war plan, a massive U.S. bombing effort that doesn't cause this regime to fall makes, again, the U.S. look worse. And I think China wants to move into this vacuum that's being created as the U.S. alienates allies and has wars like this that don't seem to go well.
General, your thoughts on China helping with Iran's defense potentially?
Well, I would say China has already provided support to Iran, primarily in terms of intelligence gathering and targeting, very specific targeting access. They also have immense cyber capabilities, which is a good source of intelligence collection as well. True, as David indicated, a blockade is an act of war, but we've been at war with Iran for the last 5+ weeks. That's a distinction without a difference. I see the application of force there is, again, to ensure safe passage, or at least to control what comes through and what doesn't come through. I can only estimate that at the strategic level, that if China were to provide access to provide those capabilities, that would be a threat to U.S. presence in the region. That would be an immense escalation. That takes this over to an entirely different level. And then the other thing is, as we go through this, bear in mind, we have the arrival of a ton of Marine forces with the capability, primarily in my mind, not to assert across the shore with some grand mission, but it's a possibility to use those capabilities to ensure the security of the highly enriched uranium, which is absolutely critical at this point.
Beautiful shot of Capitol Hill this morning as the sun has come up over Washington, D.C., and Congress returns from its 2-week Easter recess today with lawmakers facing a packed agenda. At the top of the list, of course, the war in Iran. Democrats in both the House and Senate are expected to once again push an effort to rein in President Trump by teeing up votes on war powers resolutions. Joining us now, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a member of the Foreign Relations, Judiciary, and Appropriations Committees. Good to have you on. Do you think that Democrats will have any luck with their Republican counterparts as it pertains to the ongoing war with Iran?
Look, Mika, I certainly hope we will. As you just mentioned, we're coming back from an Easter recess, a recess in which President Trump opened on Easter with a hateful, angry tweet suggesting he was about to wipe out an entire civilization. And when Pope Leo, the leader of 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, pushed back on that statement, pushed back on war and President Trump's immigration policies, as well as his conduct of this war in Iran, President Trump has escalated by personally attacking the Pope and then, shockingly, this morning, posting an AI-generated visual of him as Jesus Christ. Mika, there's 70 million Catholics in this country. This is an overwhelmingly Christian country, but a country of faith where we respect each other, that was rooted in freedom of worship, freedom of religion. It seems to me that Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance and President Trump seem determined to secure their white Christian nationalist base and to push aside and to offend and to distance themselves from all the good people of our nation who want good things for our country and for each other. This has been a very dark chapter. And one of the things I've been struck by is the silence of so many of my colleagues on the other side. It was Martin Luther King who said the real tragedy is not the cruelty of the bad, but the silence of the good. And I'm hopeful we will hear some voices this week speaking up and saying our national leader, our president, should not be attacking one of the world's greatest religions, should not be putting himself in the space of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and of one of the most important figures in world history, not least of which spiritual history. This is a watershed moment for those who want to stand for decency and for the values that founded our country.
I have to ask you about that silence, though, because it definitely is. And the Easter message, the picture of the president himself as Jesus Christ.
Right.
The silence on the side of your Republican counterparts, for the most part. I mean, there are, I guess, a few voices.
There are.
I mean, there are some things, Senator, that don't take prep, that you don't need to discuss.
Right.
And I think we can put those in that category. So then how do you explain the silence on the Republican side at this turning point in history?
So over and over since Trump returned to the presidency, he's made outrageous statements. I'm going to make Canada the 51st state. I'm going to wrest Greenland away from our trusted NATO ally, Denmark. I'm going to retake the Panama Canal. Statements that have really unsettled our closest, most trusted allies and have made us less safe. And a few Republicans have really spoken up about that. I led a bipartisan delegation to Denmark, for example, earlier this year, where Senators Tillis and Murkowski joined me. And other Republican senators have stood up for NATO when Trump has gone after them. But this seems to me a whole nother level. To literally and explicitly threaten genocide against the civilization, the ancient Persian civilization of Iran, and then to keep carrying out a war that Pope Leo has called an immoral war, and that is certainly a war not authorized by the American people, and where Trump changes its scope and purpose and cost from day to day. Look, the average American is going to get up today and see the price of gas go up. If President Trump thinks he's got a solution to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz by the Iranians, threatening to now fully close it using the American Navy is both risky and likely to send the price of gas and the price of daily living for Americans skyrocketing.
So, Senator, let's talk a little bit more about this blockade that the president announced after peace talks in Islamabad fell apart without a deal this weekend. You mentioned it, that the price of oil undoubtedly will go up. Right. We're seeing it already overnight. We can see that will likely continue in the coming days. But talk to us about some other issues that you see with this, including, this is something we mentioned an hour or so back on the show, how Beijing is going to react the first time one of their ships gets stopped by an American naval vessel.
So this is the most critical vulnerability that China has, that if we were to secure control over Iran's oil exports, would give us huge strategic leverage, comparable to their leverage over us in critical minerals. But to do so would require an act of war, a naval blockade. And I don't believe we're prepared for it. I don't believe the American people have been prepared for it. I don't think our naval assets in the region are ready for it. This is an enormously risky maneuver. And I'll remind you, what comes out of the Strait of Hormuz isn't just gas, the oil that's produced, but natural gas, fertilizer, and helium. Now, why do those matter? Fertilizer is critical right now for the planting season in dozens of countries around the world. We're going to see another wave of hunger as a result of this blockade. Helium's critical to a whole bunch of MRIs. Anybody get an MRI around here? And so Trump's going to skyrocket the prices for the average American and put our security at risk. And Xi Jinping doesn't face midterm elections. His ability to survive this moment and to test whether or not our allies are going to stick with us in the Western Pacific and in Europe gives him a huge opportunity. I hope and pray that we're back at the table negotiating with the Iranians this week, rather than this ongoing blustering approach by President Trump for a war of choice that he's stumbled into.
And he's at least still considering the idea of reviving military strikes, though he has not given that order just yet. Senator Coons, we also want to get your reaction. You sit on the Foreign Relations Committee, of course, about what we saw in Hungary yesterday. A remarkable win, a trouncing of Viktor Orban, which means so much for the people there, but also, I'd argue, sends a signal around the globe. It is a defeat, certainly, for Vladimir Putin. And it's a defeat, let's be clear, for President Trump and his closest allies who all went to Hungary to campaign for Orban.
He sent J.D. Vance to campaign for Orban in the last couple of days. J.D.'s had a pretty tough week. Our vice president, he's got a president personally attacking the Pope. He is a recent convert to Catholicism. He went to campaign for Orban, who lost decisively. He went to try and negotiate a peace deal with the Iranians. How's that going? Millions of Hungarians responded to Peter Magyar, whose party won an overwhelming victory, because he went throughout the country campaigning on local issues. The terrible mismanagement of a weak economy and the open corruption of an authoritarian. I think there's a message in there for anyone else who's facing elections around the world, that in a democracy, average folks are looking for a better quality of life for them and their families, for improved security, and they don't like bald and gross corruption. I think there's some corollaries here for the United States in our upcoming elections.
Democratic member of the Foreign Relations, Judiciary and Appropriations Committee, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mika,
for coming on this morning.